So my name's Beaudry. I'm the manager of the new product development lab inside Boise State University in Studio Blue. Just to give a little bit of background on me in the new product development lab, we do engineering consulting. We utilize students to do that. So we have mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, business students, GIM majors, a little bit of everything, some videography thrown in there too. So we try to offer a little bit of everything to clients or entrepreneurs that are looking to develop product. And so one of the things that we did, we 3D printed the little vessel stands, the little octopus vessel plaques that might be going around. So Vessel also donated the printer in order to get that done. So they're a partner of ours. So that was pretty nice. Anyway, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Yeah, Ryan Gray, co-founder CEO at SGW Design Works. We're a product design, engineering, and prototyping company working with many companies in many industries. Won't go too much deeper than that since we talked about it last time. But off to Derik.
Hi, I'm Derik Ellis, CEO and co-founder of a company named Vessel, established here in Boise. Our mission is to help small and medium-sized manufacturers grow. And we do this through supply chain consulting, supply chain technology, and market research.
I'm Cameron Williams. I'm the Director of Engineering for Melni Technologies. We are a technology engineering company that has a patent portfolio over unique ways of connecting different types of wire connectors in the industry.
Good afternoon. Sure. Mick Wiskerchen, I'm the CEO for venturecapital.org. We help entrepreneurs ultimately get to capital. We have different tracks, which is kind of learning and development, and also we help you surround you with mentors to get to the next level.
Great. Yeah. So I know a lot of the people in the audience were here at the first go around, but I thought I'd let the panelists kind of recap from their individual perspectives, and then we'll wrap that up with Cameron to where he can talk about a little bit more about the transition that Melni made.
Yeah, happy to start. So you guys might remember I talked about how product development efforts have maybe lower than ideal rate of success, and there are three reasons that I referenced that drive that. You guys remember what they were? First one, anyone? Time to market, which can be driven by lots of things, one of which is unexpectedly long manufacturing lead times or manufacturing setup times. We'll talk potentially more about that in the Melni example. Second one, you remember the second one?
The product doesn't deliver.
Product doesn't deliver. That was the third one, but really good enough. Product doesn't deliver, meaning that the product gets to market and the product doesn't do what the market expects it to do or doesn't do what your marketing message said it was going to do. And the second one in the middle was, anybody remember that? And you know it?
Product market fit.
Product market fit. So basically, the market doesn't care about your product. You have to go into market with something that is different than what the market wanted. And the first of those strategies, I think we're going to be hearing a bit about with Melni's example. The second two, it's not too much mental acrobatics to make those connections as well, but we'll get more of that in a minute.
Yeah, my major takeaway and the time I spent during the first presentation was really around customer validation. What are the steps you're taking early on to understand if you're working with the right customer, their purchasing behaviors and decision making, all of that's very critical. It should be the first thing that you're quite aware of before you start accepting or borrowing money and running down that path.
Yeah. Mine was really, if I kind of put the investor hat on, and I've worked with a lot of product companies, a lot of manufacturing companies through time, and I've been introduced to a couple more Cuban companies, so it's been interesting to see the story here, and you guys will hear more about that. But I always look at it, it's not just about the money, it's what comes with the money. What are those relationships and also doors that are going to get opened as you take that cash? Is there opportunities ultimately is there skill sets? Is there talent that's involved that you get, once again, you get more access to? So it's an interesting story, and you guys are going to learn more about that. But don't think about just a physical check. It's more than that when you're starting to build out those relationships going forward.
Great, so those of you that were in session one got to watch a video where Mark Melni presented to Shark Tank. And on Shark Tank, they got hammered, of course, that's what happens, you go on the show, they let you know how horrible your product is, and then of course, Mark Cuban wrote a check. So Mark Cuban decided to invest in Mark Melni's company. And now I have Cameron here to tell you how that changed everything for them. How was that, Cameron?
Yeah, so this was a little bit before I started at Melni, but I know the history pretty well. And yeah, I think the common perspective that's taken is, they invest in your company and things just take off. But for Melni, it actually kind of went the other way. We entered kind of what's called the valley of death at this point. And what that meant was really taking on the responsibility of what's all of this capital investment do for us, what can we do to grow the company, and so we dove straight into manufacturing, tooling, trying to meet these customer needs that we weren't fully aware of, and a lot of mistakes were made in that time frame because we weren't taking these appropriate steps to creating deliverables that were needed in the market. And so years went by of us trying to kind of, not necessarily vertically integrate, but get towards that goal of how can we build this to a point that we bring it in-house and start buying molding machines of our own, and, working with all these third-party manufacturing centers and just not really getting to a profitable point and getting very close to, closing the company at certain points. Completely operating on investment capital, no profitability for years. And it wasn't until recently that we were approached by a very large OEM that is in the electrical industry that said, hey, we are looking for crimpless technology for our connectors. Do you guys have any idea about maybe doing a licensing agreement? And it wasn't necessarily, that wasn't quite the aha moment yet. It was just within like another month, another big OEM contacted us and asked us the same thing. And at that point, we're like, wow, for us, we don't have the horsepower to become this giant OEM of ourselves. That's what the goal was. It wasn't happening. Didn't have the operating capital to hire a whole team of engineers and molding specialists and product managers and marketing and advertising, production specialists. The list is so much broader than most people, I think, recognize. And that was kind of our moment, was like, hey, let's reel back on what we're doing. We have a real opportunity here to just engineer and just design and just integrate our stuff into a way bigger company that has all of this structure in place and get an agreement in place that makes sense for us to stay alive during just the relationship time and then grow from the royalties that are paid out as the years progress. So that was the pivot, was going from let's be an OEM to let's be a technology company with a patent portfolio that's broad and keep our patents close to us, but license this technology out until possibly an acquisition or something like that may occur someday. But our goal for now is just keep integrating and keep getting our technology spread out through some of these companies and letting them kind of grow our brand for us in a way. And we'll talk more about that, but our relationships have been really unique with these companies and how they not only license our technology, but they've been monumental in putting our name on the product with them, putting our name on all the literature of theirs, and essentially boosting us up and saying, and there's an old saying that pioneers take arrows, and in a way they're kind of doing that because, by them doing that, we get reached, people contact us, other companies, because they seen this press release by so-and-so. And, so we're careful and we have to handle those relationships very carefully. Of, do we want to keep spreading this out? Do we want to make sure we're giving rights of first refusal to so-and-so? Or, however we have to handle that, it's delicate. But it's a totally different dynamic than we were first headed down. So I think we can dive more into that now with some more specific questions. But
A quick question before we move on. Was it just serendipitous that they found you? Was it two OEMs and you weren't targeting them at all?
yeah, serendipitous is the correct word. If my boss, Mark Melni, was here, he would probably give a whole lecture on serendipity and why that's what makes the company successful. I love that about him, but there's also a lot of hard work that goes into it. And but yeah, it was like, in a way, it just kind of the universe guiding us in that direction.
Sometimes if you survive long enough, magic happens.
I think so, yeah. That's a good way to look at it.
So if we talk about that survival, right? So you were being approached by these OEMs and talking about licensing and that IP, which was a complete changeover from what you were doing before. We heard earlier on Tuesday how long that process was that you were pursuing that you were the OEM. So once those companies started to reach out to you, what did that look like? How long did that take? Describe that process a little bit, because I do think that this intellectual property outlook for some smaller manufacturing firms, design firms, is a really good option for people.
Yeah, so, yeah, it definitely wasn't immediate. It almost took a year with the one company I'm working with now to iron out all the contractual agreements, stuff. And the lawyers are good at taking their time on stuff like that. And so it's not like an overnight success, but there was a lot of discussion with our board and then just internally as a team of, how much we want to do this, because especially when you have an inventor whose IP is like their baby, right? That's where you get a lot of this is my baby, do I want to let it go? I have this dream of it being mine forever. But when you really start looking at it, it's like, look, this isn't forever. Most of these agreements are only 3 to 5 years, and then they're going to have a renewal point. And if, certain parameters aren't met within those years, if certain deliverables aren't met, things can change drastically. And so I think, for people who are looking at that, you can realize that you're not necessarily committing your IP to somebody forever. You're not even selling it to them. You're just licensing it to them for a period of time. That may turn into a sale, but for us, it was, there was about a year there of discussion and deciding how we wanted to do it and how to make sure we're protecting ourselves to where we want to pull back and keep our IP, we can,
I got a quick question for you, Cameron, on that. So if I put my investor hat on in regards to, I know you're talking about going into the board, and this is a strategic decision and it impacts all. So did you aware of any conflicts that investors have? Are they supportive of this? Or there was some that are just going, no, we got to do the molds, we got to manufacture, we got to go big that way? Or do you recall those kind of conversations, or Mark shared those?
Yeah, so there were definitely some conversations like that took place, and there still are, even years into this, because we have board members and investors that started their own companies back in the day, and that's what they know and that's what they like. And they're saying, why aren't you just growing your own company and building your own products? And they're not in the everyday struggle of what that looks like for our product and our industry specifically. And so, at the end of the day, it's easier once you have some profitability out of it to have those conversations, for one. But when you're making the decision towards that profitability standpoint, it's like, here's all the data we can acquire, to show you why this makes sense. Why we've been doing this for, I don't know, 8 years or whatever it was, and it's not working. We need to do this or do nothing, essentially, at this point. So, we're here to protect you as our investors. That's what we're going to do, and that's why this makes sense from our standpoint.
Mark Cuban play any role in this? I'm just curious. Or you just let the thing take its course?
Just lets it ride, man. Cuban, while he is involved in very small ways for our company anyway, he's not been super involved. We send him a weekly update. If something really crazy happens, he might write back a 1 sentence. That's great, or whatever it is. What's interesting, he answers his own emails, so that's pretty impressive. I mean, the guy's got to have who knows how many companies, and to not have some intern or someone handling companies like Melni, it's pretty impressive.
And he's pretty famous for saying revenue solves all, right?
Yeah, sales cures all is his kind of go-to. Yeah.
I'll just share one quick story, you guys. I got the chance to spend 10 years at the Boeing company, and we also had this same strategy when we were good at building airplanes. That's what we did, But at the end of the day, the interiors in an airplane, the stove where you put your luggage and all that, the seats, that wasn't us. We wanted to control the design because we knew the configuration of the plane, but we did licensing agreements just like Melni did, and then we outsourced that. We took the design, we controlled the IP on that because that was value to us, but we had somebody else to build those products that met our requirements ultimately in those designs. So it's kind of cool to see that pivot moment where you guys are at. But then there's also that license agreement, back to the financial side, where you're making the money off of that, but you're not having those heavy capital costs.
Yeah, we see a lot of companies that we develop products for that they come to us with maybe what Mark was envisioning early on, which is to create their own manufacturing business, which is cool, right? We all, especially if you have a technical background, you love machines, you love the thought of building something and building a plant, employing people, those are all great things, but the reality is many of those products could be built and sold, marketed without putting capital expenditure out there, either by using outside manufacturing or by just licensing technology to somebody. But I'm curious, Melni started going down pretty far, I think, down, made in USA, with either his own, production capabilities or maybe a network of domestic manufacturers making a product. What was that like? What unexpected things did you run into when you were trying to get a US made or United made product or internally made product off the ground?
Right, so yeah, we weren't just even shooting for made in the US, we were going made in Southern Idaho, right? Like we were having the injection molding done here in Napa. We sourced our electrical contacts out of a small fab shop in Beaudry, and the assembly was being done back at the molding center. So I think probably the most unexpected thing that came from that was cost. It wasn't long before you build your product and then you get it to a distributor, and then the distributor gets it to a dealer, and then the dealer gets it to the contractor, and the contractor gets it to the customer, right? It's, everybody's making their 25%. And so, we were just realizing quickly, like, we're never going to be even close to competing with what's currently being done. And so that was, for us, a big hurdle because we invested so much money into tooling. And this was, again, some of this is me speaking on prior to me actually being with the company, so I can only recall what I was told, right? And a lot of it is, I feel like kind of being misguided in certain ways, right? Like they went straight to production tooling, hard steel, right? Mass production, super expensive tooling, when they could have jumped into soft tooling and saved a lot of money.
For perspective, roughly what order of magnitude are we talking about for your tooling, just the molds, the main plastic parts? How much did you spend on that scale tooling?
Probably close to, you're talking probably 150,000 plus.
And that's for probably, what, 4-ish molded parts in that product?
It was for 2 full products, and but yeah, each one has 3 components, and so you're talking 6 molds.
And how long did you actually end up using those molds for before you?
Not long, because the other big mistake that was made there was, hey, order in volume, keep your price down. So let's order, enough to build 200,000 assemblies, or whatever it was. I'm just using that as an example, but way too many without having the orders in place to push those products out. And so, yeah, it's like a couple really big runs, and then the tools started collecting dust.
That's something we see with a lot of companies as well, especially first-time startups. They go through this process of spending money on development, spending money on tooling, and buying the first batch. And they end up with what essentially can be a garage full of product with nowhere to put it. And, these horror stories where people do that without having thought through the channel, how to get into the channel, what's the cost to get into the channel needs, and you can talk a little about that. But we've seen that a number of times, and it's a tragedy because you can burn out $500,000, $1 million doing that, and if you're a solo entrepreneur, guess what? That could be a second mortgage on your house, that could be your retirement. A lot of times, just people didn't go and get outside funding, and it ends up kind of destroying their lives. So I guess a word of caution there.
And that's when you don't have to stay customers, and that's piling up in your garage, right?
Right.
No customers. So it's just something. It's really important to make sure you're selling your products if you're in that part of the process, right?
To make sure you put your volume together before you have volume.
Yeah.
Who's a little bit, hopefully.
if you have, you know, if you have all your ducks in a row and you know your lead times and things like that, you know, you can get these customers in line with their expected time frame of when you're going to have the deliverables for them. And in most cases, that's okay as long as you can hold that lead time. You know, if you're working with a big distributor, you say, hey, this is going to be 6 weeks out because you know that's how long it's going to take to mold all the parts and cut all the pieces and to get the assembly done. You know, if you can at least hold that time frame and be deliverable on time, the 6 weeks isn't a big deal if a distributor that's ordering 50,000 parts, right? So then it makes sense to go, you can now start building your parts at that time. You have a purchase order in place essentially and you're working towards that.
So on that same track, you have a new customer, and your customer's an OEM customer, technically. You've got an end customer, but now your partner is an OEM. What criteria or expectations changed with that relationship?
Oh, everything. Right now, our deliverable was a design product that is through design manufacturing industry to be built. They take on all of that, you know, overhead expense of getting all the tools ready, and they take on that whole process. So now, literally, everything changed. Like how we approach the problems is completely different. You know, which is nice because we can be a lot more specialized in what we're doing. We can stay very focused and specific on how do we build the best product that's the safest, and you know the things that we're trying to promote as Melni and our electrical connectors. How do we do that for X, right? And just spend time working on that so that they're very satisfied when they get a product and I look at it and saying, oh gosh, we ran the DFM on this and you need to change the whole thing. You know, the goal is for them to just say, oh, ran the DFM, this looks great. You know, you got it all, everything design for engineering wise, design for manufacturing is ready, you know. We ran the cost analysis, this looks great. You know, you minimize plastic where you could, you know, and you just focus on the things that you can focus on now, and which is just that, is creating the best design for them to take to market. And they come to you with their customer needs, right? They're coming and saying, we need to, you know, jump through this hoop and dance like this. And you say, no problem, you know, we'll make it happen.
What about end customer feedback? Do they actively pass that through?
Yeah, for sure. And that comes through the sales channel usually. And what we've been doing is we try to stay so involved if we can. Like we'll be part of their sales group meetings, right? Where they have their 50 salesmen from across the country. And it's like, that's something we promoted to them, right? Like let us be part of that. That way they can talk directly to us, you know, and we can ask them questions, they can ask us questions, and we can work around their customer needs directly. And again, like, I don't know how common that is in licensing agreements and stuff, that you're this involved in the company you're licensing to. But for us, it's been, like, why not? You know, that's how we can do the best job we can for you. So it just makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Just to add to that a little bit, that's actually is a best practice, but there's a lot of firms that don't do that. So that's if you can structure your deal that way, where you have access to, you want that market feedback, especially into the design. You kind of get, as an engineer myself, you've got to understand the whys. What are those configurations, feature functionality, you know, on that product? What are those changes for? So you can adapt that into your design as much as, I don't want to say the cost behind it, but the time is your cost on expectations of rolling that new feature / product out, and setting, especially with sales force, setting those expectations with the sales force about, because they'll sell, hell, it's not even done, they already sold it. It's like, well, you can't do that, but they do. So trying to say, hey, that's a Q3 or that's a Q4, this is when that'll get rolled out, but you want to set those expectations with the sales team, because then there are, especially if you got a revenue sharing deal tied to that IP, then it's like, okay, that goes into your projections for your company, for Melni, to say, oh, here's what the financials look like. Or if you need to hire more engineers, you can start backloading. Okay, I can't do that to Q3 as soon as that new product, but here's the next one that's coming. And you just iterate on it. So that's cool, you guys got that.
I wanted to touch just quickly on something kind of talked about earlier too, and it fits into this a little bit, is with our new platform, new things we're doing, you know, when those design iterations come, it's very expedited because the company's able to do that. When we were trying to do it on our own, we had customer feedback, and right now, like I say, there's, you know, 200,000 end caps sitting in boxes that haven't even been installed on anything or sent out, and we get some major feedback from some customers that are like, we need this to fit just standard tooling. So it's like, okay, well, we can easily change that mold and do that, or make the design change, and then put some money into having the tool rebuilt. But what are we gonna do with all this? Regrind it and try to repurpose it the best we can. But it's just another one of those things where you look at it and say, hey, you gotta be very kind of careful at first with a company like this if this is where you're going.
Yeah, it's tough, especially products that include injection molded plastic or any other expensive to tool up component like a deep drum, metal part, or cast parts. Design changes are super expensive. And if you're early in the sort of adoption curve, the volume curve of your business, it's kind of counter to where you want to be, right? That tooling is an anchor holding you back. When you should be looking for change and improvement as essentially a new business with a new product. And that's a conundrum that's tough to overcome, but a licensing approach can do that. And I'm curious how many folks are familiar with kind of how, in a big picture, how licensing agreements work, or how licensing a design works. Anybody familiar? Anybody not really familiar with how that works? Mick, Cameron, you want to talk about just a big picture what a licensing agreement is and how money flows once it's in place?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. You can structure a multitude of ways. Well, one of the ways that I've always had success is you do it volume-based, or what they call tier-based. So it's based on the quantity that ultimately is going to get sold, and then it goes into a percent, meaning how much will you get if you hit tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3, and those are just thresholds. The more they sell, the more they get in the field, ultimately the percentages, they'll go up or they'll go down, but it's like this table that you can leverage, but if you don't hit those tiers, it stays where it's at. The goal is for the sales folks to push more and more product out there. We used to do a lot of that when I was exec out of Micron too. We used to call it end of life, where you knew the end of life of that. And some of these OEMs are pretty sad. I'll pick on Apple. I hated Apple. I like Apple products, but Apple's a pain to deal with. Anyhow, but they would wait till you got towards the end of life of that product because they knew they could get a better deal, and the new version was going to cost more. So they kind of sit there for a while and then say, oh, but the cool part was at least they bought up the rest of your inventory. But it's usually tied to tiered structures that you can put on, and also a revenue share. You can do both just on quantities. Sometimes if you're making too much money, you don't want to give a lot of that away. So you don't always have to do a revenue share. It's just based on the volume that goes out. But sometimes you can slice the pie if you want to share some of the revenue side of it too, besides just the quantity volume. So
Yeah, I think just sort of conceptually, the big thing is, let's say you have a new concept for whatever, Bluetooth connected golf club, and you have a decision to make. You're going to develop that product and sort of prove that it's possible to deliver that functionality in the product. You have a choice whether to go build a golf club factory or not. And it's expensive to build a golf club factory. So what if you could find somebody that you might have before considered a competitor that's already making golf clubs and take them to your design and say, listen, I think that you're suited to build and sell this product. I'm going to give you access to this design, and in return, you're going to give me $2 per unit that you sell. So you've got revenue from that. You don't have to go build a golf club factory. You get to put that concept into their sales, manufacturing, marketing engine. And if done right, it can be fairly low risk. And if done right, it can let you be free to develop your next thing rather than be tied down because you spent $10 million building a golf club factory for that design. If that makes sense.
I'll add, also something that's not talked about often is there are companies that have established themselves in the market and they're going to keep you out of that market, or they're going to do everything in their power to keep you out of the market. So partnering would be one of the only ways you get in. You see this in healthcare all the time. So if you're bringing a product to market, it can be really difficult if you don't know that industry very well. And you don't see, the regulatory compliance stuff, but also the competition that's out there trying to hold you at bay.
I can definitely attest to that. Like with the industry we entered, it's very much like that. It's a difficult industry to get into, and the types of professionals that are in it, in terms of the end user, the customer, there's a saying, they like what they know and they know what they like. And so, when you're dealing with, any type of electricity, but especially high voltages and things, it gets to where they see something new, and while it's great, they're worried about it, right? Because it's like, I'm putting this in someone's house, man. Like, do we really want to be the proof of concept for you? Even though we've gone through all the compliance, we've got it UL listed, we've done everything we needed to there, which I don't know how much you want to talk about that. It is something to be aware of depending on the industry you're going into. It could be a surprise to realize, oh, I'm going to invest 40 or 50 grand into just getting this certified. And, you know, should we have done some preliminary testing in-house and things before doing that? Because failure means another 50 grand in a couple of weeks with an iteration of the product. I mean, there's a whole nest of stuff there, but I think it's just important to realize that, yeah, like in the electrical industry, there's some big players, and they're all on, you know, the National Electrical Manufacturing Association board. They all help write the NEC, they all help write UL, and they can make it very difficult sometimes to really become a competitor, I guess, in the market. So it does make sense for us. Like, now we're working with one of them. It's easy, right? The end users, the guys that use their stuff every day, all day long, are like, oh, awesome. What a great product.
Where's this?
I remember seeing this on Shark Tank when I was scared of it. But now that it's got your name on it, awesome, you know? So, yeah, it's something to consider that it could really help get your product noticed and easily in some market share.
Yeah, I mean, a new product venture has so many buckets of risk, right? It's got the technical risk of can the product actually be produced in a way that has the features it needs to have. It's got market risk. You know, does the market care about this? It's got price risk. Can we get the price point? It's got these branding risks too, especially in slow change industries like yours. Other slow change industries are the firearms industries, notorious for point of great is low experience there. Yeah, construction. In those industries, getting a new brand name off the ground, it takes a decade, 20 years sometimes. And so if you're a startup trying to create a product, you've got all of these risks that are building on each other. So looking for ways to eliminate one of those here, one of those there. Eliminate manufacturing risk by not building a development plan. Eliminate the brand risk by finding a partner that you can piggyback on their brand and get your concept to market under their brand name. All these things would increase your chances of success and help not be one of the 70 to 90% that doesn't get there.
So we run in the new product development lab setting, we deal with new entrepreneurs, new inventors, serial entrepreneurs, and the serial ones are usually the ones that go down this intellectual property licensing route. And what we do see though is that there's two sides to this, is that a lot of people come into us with licensing just already cemented into their brain that this is a product they're gonna sell to XYZ and I'm gonna make $1 billion off of it because they already sell 1 billion of these things. And they just assume that as soon as they have the idea and have a little prototype in their hand, that they're gonna just automatically garner, interest from whoever. And so I think it's but then we have other companies that are doing the golf club model where it's the market is so saturated with really big names, or a certain company has 50% of the market share that they don't even consider that as an option. So it's really good that and what we do a lot is that mentorship side for new entrepreneurs and new inventors is like, okay, take a step back from your product a little bit and figure out what the customer looks like, who's buying it, where are they buying it, how are they buying it, what types of resources, because firearms, even though that's a heavy industry that I came from previously, it's not as regulated as most Americans would like it to be. So it's amazing what small companies can do in that industry. I mean, you can come in with a brand new product and own the market relatively quickly if you're the first to market, and especially if you can circumvent some government regulation with some trickery that they like to call it. But it is interesting. But then you get the big names and the big players, like when I was working with Gemtech and we got acquired by Smith & Wesson. It completely shifted how we built product, how we tested product, how we marketed the product, because Smith & Wesson is at its core really owned by lawyers. And so, they would put us at a halt, or they would destroy product if it didn't meet certain regulatory standards, because to them it was too much of a liability. And so they would just literally we had like a burn pile worth a couple $100,000 worth of product one day. That made us all cry a little bit on the inside. And so it is interesting. And this type of education is important because there are a lot of different avenues and paths for entrepreneurs. So
I got just some feedback to piggyback off that and what Cameron was saying too. Just as you go to market, we helped a local company here that was, they were doing HVAC, and so your copper pipes, and a lot of times they're a big AC unit in these commercial buildings go down. They're up there, in the middle of the summer soldering these copper pipes. So this company, local company, actually came up with a solderless joint that didn't take any propane torches or acetylene torches. So the fire risk went way down, but it was, once again, it was the adoption in the market. It's like, what is this? How is it this? I'm not used to, And then you outside Idaho, you start hitting those union shops, and that they don't want anything to do with that. So, but the trick we found was, to your point on associations, this company started hitting up the association. So it was kind of more of a training where they would show up at the associations and they would show how simple it was, how it worked. And then what they ended up doing was they got a lot of these guys or gals that were retired tradesmen, and then they said, hey, we're gonna have you help, because it's all the buddy system too. We're gonna have you help introduce this into the market, and we'll do kind of training sessions on how this works. People loved it because they didn't like up there running those torches either. And then they gave these ex-union folks and or tradesmen a percent. If they got a PO out of that deal because of relationships, they've been doing it for 30 years, and all of a sudden a sales order came in, they got a kickback coming out of that. And they were retired, so here was another source of income that they really didn't have before. And they also believed in the product because it reduced the level of risk out there and safety, and it was really quick to do. So they started rolling it out that way, and then the same thing later, they hit the big OEMs, and then the flywheel started to happen. So that's just another tip and trick that you may think about for the future.
I want to add to that. You can also explore influencers that run those same customer bases. So we were working with a company that was trying to service hospital kitchens with safety products, and essentially finding fire marshals or fire inspectors and giving them tools at the same time was a way for them to start educating that end customer. So, there's all kinds of ways that you get in to your customer.
And just one, to your point, the Shark Tank video, for those that watched, essentially the reason Cuban invested, right, was because we had this 50-year, lineman on the show that said, I believe in this. I did this for 50 years or however long it was, right? And this will go, and this will work, this is better, And so to your point of having an industry professional back it, there is a lot to be said about that.
it's huge. Well, we want to give the last 20 minutes or so of the talk to allow the audience to speak. We've got Sarah with Studio Blue. She's our engineering research support engineer. So she'll be handing around the mic and letting everybody talk and ask our panelists questions, Cameron questions. So I'd like to open that up. Steve can be first.
Steve already knows.
Yeah, Steve already knows.
So, Cameron, what would you have done differently? I know we've talked a little bit about getting customer feedback, talking about additional feature sets and things like that, but if you could, kind of go back in time, what would you have done differently after you got the investment to make your product better and to put it on
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard to look in hindsight, right, and say, here's what we could have done and changed and done better. But I think entering the market and entering production manufacturing a little softer in terms of, like I mentioned, production tooling versus soft tooling, those little things that are going to save you maybe $75,000, $80,000 at a time is going to be relatively huge. Understanding things like certification compliance, what that cost is going to be, having the right equipment in-house to maybe completely prove your concept before going into that market. Having a lot of customer feedback maybe originally. If you can get some soft tooling and get a certain amount of product maybe out into the hands of each tradesman to understand what exactly they want, or if this is something that's really going to take off or not early on, would have been probably pretty valuable before, building 200,000, 300,000 parts without anywhere from to go. I mean, there's a number of things there that I think we've kind of addressed that it really comes back to just understanding your market, your industry, and your product really well before making these giant investments into certain things, you know? And I know everybody loves, you know, to try to stay onshore for manufacturing, but the truth is there are times when it's worth investing in offshore manufacturing in a lot of circumstances, you know? It's something that you have to do to stay competitive. You know, we have a lot of investors who are, you know, hard on that pretty heavily, but then you have to do, sometimes we have to do to protect the company, protect your investors, and build a product that's competitive. So, you know, we probably should investigate some of that when we're here on too.
I gotta add a quick comment. You should hear how Mark talks about Cameron, how that changed his life bringing Cameron into the company. Yeah, he says it was one of the best decisions he's ever made.
We called Mark the Italian Stallion when I came on because, you know, he was, you know, like he was just so stubborn about certain things. And like I say, his investment, or his product was his baby. And, you know, somebody called his baby ugly, you know, watch out. And so, yeah, you know, I was a little more level-headed and understanding on compliance stuff specifically, you know, working with being a liaison and understanding that, hey, you're fighting a losing battle here to, you know, fight with underwriters laboratories. Like, they got to certify your product. You need to do what you can to kiss a little ass there and just get your product through. But yeah.
To go off of that too, and to help with this particular problem, the popularity of additive manufacturing has made a huge impact in how people can survey the market, right? So that's one thing that we do a lot for our customers, or at least we encourage, is get 5, 10, 15 made that are probably significantly more expensive than the final product, but it allows you to get them in front of people that aren't friends, relatives, whatever that looks like, and actually get an idea, okay, are the features that you as the inventor and the entrepreneur deemed were really important, what the customer's actually valuing? And are they actually interested in those features at all? You know, ergonomics, there's a lot of things, ease of use. And I know we highlighted this before, but you know, 3D printing the prototypes for Melni was huge because it could be tested, it could be, you know, actually felt and held in your hand. So it makes a huge difference, and it's an important resource.
Yeah, let me touch on that real quick. This still goes with this question, and that's a great way to approach these problems, is realizing that there's plenty of third-party sources. You know, NPD being one of them, Studio Blue. I'm not sure exactly what Studio Blue, but my understanding here, the guys that are great for that now. You know, guys like Ryan and his company. But, you know, reaching out to these guys and getting some real consulting, because that's worth its weight in gold for what you're putting out for that, in terms of what you may learn the hard way by not having these guys tell you, hey, you know, like I say, if somebody would have just told Mark originally, do not buy production tooling right away, you know, that would have been a pretty big expense right out of the gate. It would have saved him some money, and that's something Ryan or, you know, his team would absolutely probably recommend at the time. So I agree with that 100%.
I just gotta add like a quick micro story to tie out what you're talking about the production side. So we always did our production in the US. So we had a joint venture with Intel in Utah, but our facility in Manassas, Virginia is where we did we did R&D here, but we did our productions there. And then we would ultimately fill that thing, but then we would do it offshore. And for example, for us to build a fab here was for us to build offshore was 3 to 4 billion, and they gave you the land. Here was 7 to 8 billion, and you didn't get the land. So those were tough business decisions, but at the same time, we would fill our fabs here through the US as much as we were offshore. So you had that dial where you could turn it up and down, but you always had to control here where you needed it to make sure proof of market worked.
Awesome. Let's hear from somebody else besides Nick.
I'm Desmond from Lewis Clark State College, and I actually have 3 questions. So first of all, what's so bad about Offshoulder? manufacturing?
Nothing.
Right.
I mean, it's been a big ask. The short answer is it's been a big ask. I think a lot of people in this room, myself included, want to do it and we can't support the American economy. But we also have responsibilities to investors, employees, and sometimes to make margin, we need to be looking offshore. So I often, this is my personal point of view, I think that a stubborn view of US made only can be short-sighted, unless you're playing in certain industries like DoD-related things where you need to have specific stuff in the US. But my opinion is offshore manufacturing, at least foreign manufacturing, is a great business option to be considered in parallel with domestic. But we have customers come to us all the time that say this has to be made in the USA, and I'll tell you what, 9 times out of 10, it's not possible, unfortunately.
I always look at it though, there's not 2.0. The quality, I always go, and it takes more oversight to manage those relationships and to get what you want. So that means people are on the ground there. I mean, when I was at Boeing, we had people around the planet. It costs us a lot of time and money. And when they screwed something up offshore to bring here, you can't shut the facilities down. Airplanes are on schedule to get those built. And when that line stops, you're talking millions, if not billions of dollars that's at risk. So, and also labor, skilled labor, is it the right labor? And you can get the quality to meet the UL. So there's a lot, but flag would be quality and those relationships of what they've done before. If they've been building those types of products for competitors, cool, go down that, but you've got to make sure you do your diligence in those relationships.
And
I should say, as far as customer relationships go too, there's some studies out there around, how many Americans care that it's made in the US, right? And it's a certain number, maybe it's 20% that actually say, okay, I buy it because it was made in the USA, not made in, offshore. But then it says, of that percentage, well, how many are willing to pay 3 times as much because it's made in the US? And now, that's 10% of that original 20%. And it just dwindles down to a point where who are you really trying to satisfy, right? I mean, a very small subset of the American population actually care enough to pay 3 times as much for it,
Okay, thank you. And so what you said to have an investor interested in your product, you really have to understand the market well. And so what would be like one of the first steps to understanding the market for your product?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of to piggyback off of what we talked about with the client and figuring out what the customer needs is that, getting a, initial product run in whatever way that looks like, whether it's soft tooling, whether it's 3D printing, there are a lot of different ways you can do that, but it's a great way to, 1, build interest, and then 2, test feature sets that is relatively cheap. The initial capital is low. Obviously the product itself, you may be losing money on, but if you're only building 50 of them at a time, it's not that big of a risk if you can really garner a lot of interest.
There's some great examples in a couple lean startup about this. Depending on what the product is, a lot of times there are ways to do things like build up a website with photoreal renderings, really well thought out product descriptions and feature set descriptions and benefit descriptions, and then by Google Ads to place strategically that link in front of certain audiences and see what percentage of those people you can get to a buy now screen without even having to fulfill it. When they get to the buy now screen, you can say, whatever, back order until 2023. But it gives you a way to test the feature set, to test the hypothesis about your product and how people care about it or don't care about it without having to actually go visit the product. That can be a nice DIY way to do it, especially if you've got some more development skills.
You should have a pretty good idea of who your customer is, and you should have a strong theory, strong enough that you go out and find those people and sit down and have a coffee with them or have a conversation with them. I'm not saying friends or family or close relationships. I'm saying you'd actually go out and find people and see if they'd be willing to buy that product and what would hold them back from buying that product.
Just real quick too, the piggyback on the building a website is the crowdfunding, methodology works well for that as well, because in a lot of ways you are building this landing page with all your feature sets, how much it's going to cost, those renders, people using the product, And it gives you a spot to send people to say, hey, if you like my product, the idea of my product well enough, put your money up for it. And then once we make that goal, then I can actually produce it before we actually go down that road of having tooling and everything else made.
And I was just gonna say, to keep in mind that like, you don't have to do all of this on your own, because it could be overwhelming to say, how do I reach these customers? There are companies out there that specifically will, do this, strategize this for you. I think even just, the SBDA will help with a certain amount of this. And so it's worth finding those resources and allocating, your original investment into that stuff and not just spinning your wheels yourself, because the whole idea of open sourcing to me is huge. Like, I just think it's the freaking future for, a lot of things, is letting professionals be professionals and not try to be somewhat professional at everything in your company, and so that's my 2 cents on that.
Good question. I can talk about that. For a licensing type of agreement, I'm sure it changes case to case, but generally, how much validation does a company want in your design and in the market and such like that before they would agree to license your IP?
So from my experience, I'm curious to see what you guys say about this, but we've been involved in a number of these. In all honesty, only a small percentage of us have been successful, but companies like to take on licensing agreements for products that fit really well within their product family and are not too much of a stretch for them, that they don't necessarily need to, or expect to see that you've got a track record of sales already. I know you guys probably already have that, but it's possible to engage a company and say, listen, this is a pre-revenue product. You usually want to have some kind of protection in place, like at the very least, an original patent application. So the short story is, if your product fits well within what they're already doing, they don't have to invest much capital to launch your product, their tolerance for risk is going to be high. If you come to them with a product that they're going to have to retool one of their manufacturing plants for, and they're going to have to hire a different type of salesperson than they already have, their tolerance for risk is going to be much lower. So that's an indirect answer to your question, but look for potential licensees that are in a position to easily make and market what your idea is, because then they'll be willing to look at it as a product line extension. It's low risk, and they'll care less about validation.
And I've experienced this with software, and you're probably going to be given a test runs, and they're going to test your product out with their customers for a period of time. You might get a territory or just some small segment that they're going to test, so just make sure it performs.
Yeah, and to back up that is when Gemtech, who I worked with previously, was purchased by Smith & Wesson, it was in their product family because obviously they're a firearms manufacturer and we made suppressors. So it was something that was outside of their wheelhouse in terms of the regulatory and the manufacturing, the development and everything else. But it was actually cheaper for them to acquire Gemtech than it was for them to get all the engineers, do all the R&D, do the initial production runs, build a market share. And so they just did that acquiring so that they got our market share, and now it's just part of their family. So it's obviously for this environment, that means that Gemtech was in business for 20 years before they were acquired by Smith & Wesson. So that's where, having be first to market and developing that brand is important. But then, what Ryan said for the other side of that.
I'll give you an example. I'll pick on T-Sheets with Matt Rizzle. Matt had that relationship with Intuit. He had one of his mentors was already there. Theirs was a niche product that Intuit didn't have, but they always kind of wanted it. They allowed Matt to spend ultimately a couple of years building that thing out, and the market share. They're testing the whole time. Trust me, behind the scenes, I'm sure they're having these kind of discussions, but they said, let's keep going. And a lot of times they'll give you that opportunity. And I've bought probably half a dozen different companies that do that. So I'll let them run. I'll give them a couple quarters, if not 2 to 3 quarters, and let them keep doing your thing, but I'm there with you and we're watching stuff. And then when the time's right, I either bring you into the fold as a joint venture or later, I just flat out buy you. And if you want that, I mean, we look at it, and you, as an entrepreneur, you gotta look at, okay, what's the pros and cons, and does that take you away from your dream or not, or is that, do you want to do an exit? So those are all discussions, but it's gotta work. Your product's gotta work, the design's gotta be there, and you have to have that fit in the market to Derik's point.
Yeah, in our case, we were special because they came to us, so we don't have a ton of experience trying to find somebody to license to, but we have started venturing down that road, and it is a lot of thought of, hey, does this, type of connector, does this type of design fit, in 3M's, market line, what do they have for products, and does this make sense? Are they in the auto industry heavily? Are they in oil and gas heavily? What is it, right? And being smart in the idea, and a lot of it came from just realizing that's why the company that we're working with now, and their name's Amphenol Industrial, and it's, most people don't know, that's why I don't even throw it out there, but they're a large internet company, and when they came to us, it was like, this is something we need, because the market's so competitive, any edge we can get just by X amount, and this is all in the solar industry for them, is worth it. And so, to Ryan's point of trying to make sure it's a fit, if you know that this is something that's not only going to help you, but it's going to significantly help grow their company in their market, I think it becomes a lot easier for them to take that risk on, for sure.
And Mick, you spoke to this in the last session, that some of these larger companies have specific wings of their business development team that are specifically catered towards acquiring smaller companies, looking for these smaller companies, looking for these products that can help assist in what they already do, build their brand, leverage the brand that you may have already, or like a Gemtech, like a Cheat Sheets, and say, okay, this is a direct fit for us.
Yeah, just the one thing I'll just a warning flag. If this is like Mark, this is your baby. Be careful. If you have that vision, you want to grow and build it, and you're doing these licenses, or you're going to get acquired. Sometimes larger companies acquire you so a competitor doesn't get it, and meaning they're going to put it on the shelf. It never goes anywhere, which honestly sucks. Because it's like, you just bought this, and we did that. We used to do those things because we didn't want a competitor to get it and then scale it the heck out of it. Sometimes we put it there for a little while, then we bring it back out. Sometimes the business model didn't pan out. So I'm just throwing the flag up there. If it is your baby, you can exit, take cash. But if you really want to see it go, just a red flag.
And sometimes they don't know what to do with it once they have you.
Yeah.
We've seen that.
Yeah, get a good lawyer. you want to have a good lawyer in place when you're writing these contracts, for sure.
Thank you all for coming. Our time is up, and I'd love you to give a huge round of applause to our panelists.